work and yoga. And before I take up the subject matter from the tome 1, I want to make two or three observations on the subject. There are two main defects of the systems of yoga current in the world, and that is why, though yoga is a very powerful and potent means of effecting a change in the individual and collective life, it has not succeeded as it should have succeeded because of two defects. One was especially current in India, and that many people regarded yoga as a personal attainment, as something to be done for oneself, which really makes it easy for others to do. So that way it's a very good contribution. But yoga is an effort for personal attainment, it is one. And when the attainment is done, the attainment is a special possession. So to a special condition to be in, to be wrapped in, to be, you can't say enjoyed, but at least to be well used by the person for his own delight, for his own inner life. It would have necessarily no direct bearing on life of the world. You see, it was regarded as something that one has to do for oneself. That is one difficulty. A personal effort and a personal solution. So whatever happens or whatever is attained is only for oneself and it remains. And if an influence is produced on oneself, well, a little influence also can go into life. But there was no direct acceptance of work as first a means for practice of yoga one and as a field for the expression of a higher consciousness. Well, life remained a field for desire and ego and ignorance of man and ordinary life. It was called ordinary life. And yoga was regarded extraordinary life, you see. And this dichotomy, this cutting of life into two watertight compartments, made it very difficult for yogic influence and power to create, a different mold of life or to influence life in the right direction. Second difficulty comes in two ways. Second difficulty can be divided into two parts. One is that as soon as one gets the idea of some perfection, the first thing he wants to do is to change everybody else and persuade everybody else to accept the idea. Even with regard to yoga, the same thing happens. If one wants the yoga to be done, immediately he wants to go and tell everyone, start something and then get somebody and then regular pamphlets and membership and then say sit down at a time and think of this and do this, and everybody has to do something. And that brings down the yogic effort to the mental level or vital level, you see. It's not bad, nothing is bad. I don't say it is, but it's it's an effort which is just like publishing a book or a paper. It's all as good as that. Without doing the yoga, the idea is that you must make others do the yoga. But what is the yoga? Unless you yourself do it, unless you yourself change the consciousness, what is the point in gathering 500, 1,000 persons to say, all right, we will sit down and think of world unity or think that all must be good, everybody must be happy, or some light is there and so on. Well, it is a mental effort, vital effort, and therefore it has the same efficacy or capacity to realize itself as any idea or a scheme in the vital. It does not become a yogic thing. My point is that it is not a yogic action. That is the second difficulty. So that is, and Mother has answered this indirectly in her first talk on conversation with the Mother, words of the Mother. What do you want to do the yoga for? Do you want to do it for peace or personal attainment? Or do you want to do it for humanity? And so on. We read that passage, it is there in one of the talks. So there she has indirectly made it clear that you should not look upon this effort of yoga as if it was meant for personal attainment only. That is one. Or that it was meant for humanity. Something will happen to humanity because it is divine's intention also to do something for humanity. Not because man wants to do something for humanity. The very idea that is given to man is most probably an inspiration from the divine. And to do it in the divine way would be first to get into the divine consciousness. Then one would be in a condition to do the best that he can, the highest service to humanity. The highest service that a man can render to humanity is to know his true self, because very few know it. You see, and by knowing your own self and by trying to fulfill yourself in the divine, you are rendering the very highest service, because that is what man requires. Man's problem or difficulties or situation is not going to be solved by only outer schemes and methods and social legislation or political laws and so on. Man is not going to change that. You can say that if there is a call from inside and you feel that certain thing done outside for the sake of others, for the sake of service, is for your own spiritual development, then that work does not prevent your spiritual development. But otherwise, doing work for the sake of work only means outer result, social result, political result, moral result. That does not necessarily make your yogic development possible, because it keeps you tied down to mental ideals and vital motives. That's one. And secondly, as the capacity for doing public work or service to the outside people increases, if he is not careful in doing it as a yoga, well, his ego also expands correspondingly. The vital ego also, what he was not capable of doing, he is now capable of doing. Therefore he thinks that you see, he has now a position, and then he acts in an expanded ego which he would not have done when he was not in public service. So public service necessarily does not make him grow in his inner life. It very often can give him power, influence over others, expand the influence or area of his vital influence, make others accept his scheme or his ideas, but does not necessarily raise him in spiritual life, because he will be 9 out of 10. The chance is that he will be subject to his own egoism, and as egoism goes on expanding, well, he will be rather spiritually perhaps not in a far better condition than when he started. So these are the two things. They're doing yoga for the sake of one's own development without any regard for life or without any attitude towards life. And secondly, doing the work for humanity in the intellectual, ethical, or moral way by methods which have proved to be not very efficient intellectually or mentally or outwardly, organizationally, as we call it. These are two things that I wanted to stress in the beginning. And third thing that I want to say is that work and yoga, Gita connected for the first time. Gita is the first, science or book which gives you a complete, so to say, well, text for applying yoga to life and life, using life for yoga. It is the first organized expression of yoga of action. Gita for the first time brought to notice this fact that 9/10 of man's activity is work, outer action. 9/10 of his energy runs into channels of outer work. Therefore, if you leave that out, and in 1/10 of what is left, you try to practice meditation and do something, it might give you some advantage, but it is my greater part of the energy is already dissipated or gone to outer activity. So Gita pleads for the first time that no, life must be accepted. Means work must be accepted. Accepted as a means for growing into spiritual life, not a means for attaining earthly ends, satisfying ego, desire, or carrying out some mental motive or intellectual idealism. No. Work should be, or action should be accepted as a definite means for growth towards the divine. Just as with the intellect, you resort to Jnana Yoga, yoga of knowledge, and expand the intellect and gradually train it, purify it, widen it, subtilize it, and make it capable of concentration so that it is either widened and ascends to the higher consciousness or is silenced and receives the reflection of the higher consciousness in it. And by the reflection knows it. You see, it is possible for mind to do that. The same way the emotions can be developed, enlarged, freed from attachment, from actions and reaction, likes and dislikes, emotional movements of feelings which are very personal, egoistic, making it free and purifying it from all that, and turning it toward divine. So all relations which are emotionally, felt by men are, well, taken back from the objects of attachment and then turned towards the divine. The love between father and son, or mother and child, or between friend and friend, or you see, between master and servant. Now, these relations are taken and offered to the divine, so that the divine becomes the child, divine becomes the father, divine becomes the friend, divine becomes the master. Like that, you see. Well, that way, the whole yoga is practiced on the scale of bhakti, on the plane of emotions. Gita says that you can do the same with action. You can take up work and use work for your growth toward divine. So many people mistakenly think that whatever action they are doing, well, is karma yoga. In fact, one friend wrote to me very seriously when I told him to try to practice yoga. He said, "I am doing yoga." I said, "How?" "Ah, I am doing work. I am doing work." Now, everybody is doing work, so but everybody is not doing karma yoga. Karma is action. So he said, I'm working and I'm doing karma yoga. How? He said, I'm doing karma, I'm doing action. All action is not karma yoga. All action is action. Work you are doing is work. But when work is turned towards the divine as a means for realizing, then it becomes a process of growth. So in the action or in the work that you take up, the first condition in karma yoga, yoga of action, is that you must put down as your aim to reach the divine by action. If that is not there, you can go on doing any amount of action, it will not become karma yoga. Karma yoga begins only when one who does the karma yoga or wants to do karma yoga starts with the resolution that he is going to use all his actions to reach the divine, a step to reach the highest reality. And when he does that, then he is beginning of karma yoga. Then when you take up the karma yoga, then many things will then help the present world, because present world is obsessed with the idea of life. And this life has to be turned towards the divine. It can only be done by turning the course or movement or flow of action towards the divine. Then the same movement which is now dedicated to desire, to career, to money making, to name, to fame, to do something to please oneself, the same actions, if they are done with the motive of reaching the divine, well, of course, they will then tend to growth. And the nature of work also will change. Now what one is doing for himself, when he will not do it for himself but for the divine, then he will learn how to do with the right attitude. In the karma, it is not the outer action but the attitude that is important. From where you work, not what you do. What you do may be small, or may be great, or what you do may be, unimportant or important. What you do may look good or may look wrong or right. That is nothing to do with karma yoga. Karma yoga is concerned with from where do you proceed to act. Do you proceed to act from your own personal motive of desire and ego? Then you have to change the whole origin of your action. How to change the origin of all your action? So for that you change the attitude that I can't at once find out the true origin. So Gita says, well, you stop desire for the fruit of your action, result of what you are doing. That is the first step where you will try to give attachment to your work. Whatever work you are doing, you do without desire for any result, impersonally. Because it has come to you from your will or from your understanding, from your logic or from your conviction that this I must do. Now, whether you must or not, but you feel you must, all right, then you say, I do. When you do it with the motive of giving up all the desire for result of the action. I must succeed. I must get this. I must find out. Well, all that you give up. You only do the action absolutely impersonally without any desire for the fruit. That is the first step to change the origin and motivation of the action, because you can't immediately go to the root and change from there. That is difficult. My Gita's whole Karma Yoga is a very scientific system. Now, today we are taking up the some observations of Sri Aurobindo, which is sent to disciples, and as we read, we will find you know, many ways to understand the relation between the field of work and man's development towards the divine. Because work means the field of life. And unless and until the uplifting force of spiritual life is brought into life, man's difficulties and man's complex problems will not be solved. It is there that you have to see how to bring the solution of man's difficulty. And it is only by bringing the light of higher consciousness, by bringing the divine into life, that man's problem could be solved. In fact, man's problem is not man's, really speaking, but the problem of the divine. And it is best for man to seek the help of the divine in solving his problems. And he can only do it by effectively by opening his life to the truth, to the divine, to the supreme, and seeking guidance as to the form and the nature of the work that would tend to first personal fulfillment and fulfillment of the divine will, which is really the point of personal fulfillment. When one fulfills the divine's will, well, that is his highest fulfillment. There is no higher fulfillment of man or for man than to fulfill the will of the divine in him. And Gita points out the technique of identifying or harmonizing the individual's will with the cosmic and the supreme will. How to do that? By a gradual elimination of personal element in the action, eliminating the personal initiation, eliminating from it personal motive, eliminating from it the disturbance that is caused in the vital being of man by success and failure and intensity of action, and by offering the work as a sacrifice, as an offering to the divine all the time, so that whatever is done is not, something that has a reaction or has a binding influence on his psychology. It frees him from the bondage of work, because when one accumulates work on his own self, on his ego and desire, then work goes on piling its weight upon man. But when one goes on offering the work to the divine, well, one is constantly freed from the pressure of the work that he has done. That is one thing. And then he is able to see clearly, understand clearly, act correctly. You see, he is able to act in a more efficient manner, spiritual efficiency. Now, he is telling about yoga through works. The ordinary life consists in work for personal aim. We have done something about it. And satisfaction of desire under some mental or moral control, touched sometimes by a mental ideal. This is how 9/10 of the work is done, external work. If you study, ordinary life consists in work for personal aim and satisfaction of desire under some mental or moral control. Desire you can't live free when you see you control desires by mental or moral control. And sometimes you might have a touch of idealism. The Gita's yoga consists in offering one's work as a sacrifice. Sacrifice to the divine. Now, why is this put down as a sacrifice to the divine necessary? Because the power to act really does not, in its origin, belong to man, you see. If you study the origin of power that one has got, you will find that the capacity one has got is not in the personal sense his own. The capacity is derived from scores, dozens of sources. It comes from, the parents, from tradition, from accepted religion, from society, from reading, from school, from teacher, from friends, from, from thousand sources. The capacity which one thinks his own is really not in that personal sense his own. Whatever power one acquires is a result of many forces. That's why Gita says here that offer the work, because it seems that power is given to us rather than that we possess it individually as our own individual possession. You see, power seems to be somebody is given that you get that. Well, the best is to offer it to the divine. Well, in that case, the power does not increase the ego. That is one advantage. And then egoless and desireless action, devotion for the divine, and entering into cosmic consciousness, the sense of unity with all creatures, oneness with the divine. Well, Gita, he has put down roughly the outline of the Gita. Work done as a sacrifice to the divine, conquest of desire by giving up the desire for the result of one's action to the divine, and afterwards sacrificing or giving to the divine the initiation of one's action, to get away from oneself the sense of the doer, that I am the one who acts. Instead, one hands over the initiation or beginning of action to the divine within himself. Devotion for the divine and entering into cosmic consciousness, wanting the will of cosmic consciousness to come and work in oneself, not one's own personal will, but when you offer the work to the divine, then the will of the individual tends to become harmonious with the will of the cosmic consciousness or divine consciousness. It will get into identity. And when the work is being done, one will be conscious that it is not his will that is working, but it is some higher will that is, working through him. And more, when he feels this identity or oneness or harmony, well, more and more his work will tend to become first impersonal, and he will feel the least weight of the work or bondage of the work, attachment and egoism, all will be eliminated and excluded from his consciousness. And the work will become spiritually more effective. It is not the size of the work or the kind of work or the nature of the work, but the origin from which it is done that really creates the real elevating effect on the individual and effect on the surroundings. It is not influence produced from outside, but an influence that ordinary works from the vibration that works when you are working with the right attitude. In this yoga, means in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, we add the bringing down of the supramental light and and force and transformation of nature, because that is what the scheme of the Gita has not, given its thought to. In yoga through work, what is of first importance is not the religious or non-religious character of the work done. Some people think that if I have to do spiritual work, it must be religious work. It's not that. You may be religious work and full of egoism. In fact, that's what I told before yesterday, that in such religious work there is more social life than a religious life. You see, they come together and have coffee or tea and talk and chat and picnic and all kinds of things, gather money for something, and it's all social work and nothing to do with religious spirit at all. That's why he's pointing out that in work, yoga, through work, what is important, first importance is not religious or non-religious character of the work, but the inner attitude in which the work is done. If the attitude is vital, means full of desire, ambition and ego, and not psychic, means does not proceed from the soul with an offering and a devotion, then one throws oneself out in the work and loses the inner contact with his true consciousness. The contact with the inner consciousness is lost when one is thrown out in the work, completely extroverted. If it is a psychic being, means the soul through which initiates the action or gives this first inspiration, then the inner contact remains. The force is felt supporting or doing the work, and the yoga progresses. So, what is important is not the outer form of the work, but the attitude in which it is done. The only work that spiritually purifies is that which is done without personal motive, without desire for fame or public recognition or worldly greatness, without insistence on one's own mental motive or vital lusts and demands or physical preferences, without vanity or crude self assertion or claim for position or prestige, done for the sake of the divine alone and at the command of the divine. That work purified. Now, this is very clear in one sense. All work done in an egoistic spirit, however good for people in the world of ignorance, is of no avail to the seeker of yoga. There are many instances in Indian, mythology and stories which illustrate this point in a popular way. Stories reported in the Mahabharata, the great Indian epic, that Emperor Yudhishthir did 12 years sacrifice. A session of 12 years of sacrifice, continuous. Sacrifice can be for a day, for a week, for a month, for 8 months, for 12 months, and for 12 years. Well, he did the highest sacrifice, 12 years. And then it requires a lot of expense. You see, if an emperor takes up the sacrifice, then he has to spend a lot of money and the charity and so on. He must do all religious acts he has to do. So when the 12-year sacrifice was finished, then the fire is to be put out. This fire is lighted in the altar, you see. The fire is put out. And then the fire is quieted. As they say, Shanti, you see, the peace is what? And the fire is asked to go to its own home. And now the work is done, you go to your own home and so on. So Yudhishthir was standing there when the last day was finished and the sacrifice was completed, and the ceremony of a hearty send off to fire was given, and all the priests were there, and a mongoose came, a sort of a squirrel, and tried to roll its body in the ashes of the sacrificial altar. You see, the ashes were taken out, so he rolled inside and shook its head like that. So it looked very queer that a queer mongoose-like thing should come like that, and it's a queer body. One half of its body was golden color, and another was not golden color. So he rolled the body, and then he shook his head and was going back. Then Yudhishthira was a little curious as to why this creature has come and rolled in the ashes and is going. So the rishi who was attending knew. So he said, well, he's come here to test. He said, what do you mean? He said, yes, he has come here to test. So he took a pail of water and threw on the mongoose and said, well, tell what you want to say. I give you the human speech. So he said, I heard about this great sacrifice of King Yudhishthira, 12 years of sacrifice, the Rajsu Yagna it is called, you see, royal sacrifice. And I thought it was a very great thing. And so I came. But I find it is not so great a thing. That's all that I want to say. So what do you mean? How do you say this is not such a great thing? It is 12 years sacrifice. He has given millions of, gold horse and cows in charity and done all. He has almost spent his treasury in this sacrifice. So he said, that is all right. Then he was asked that, but why is your one half of your body like this color? He said, that is why I tell you that this is not so great a sacrifice. So he said, what happened? So you see, once there was drought, as you say, want of rain for 12 years. It didn't rain. It has happened in India several times like that. 6 years and certain part there is no rain. Well, then there is famine because there is no water and there is no agriculture and so on and so on. So there was a drought one, and in the forest there was a family of Brahmin that was living, and things had died. You see, vegetation and everything had dried up, and there was hardly anything to be found. They had, with great difficulty, the natural rice that grows. You see, wild rice that grows. They had something collected for themselves, and hardly they were eking out the livelihood. Well, suddenly a guest came to their house, and the guest was hungry. So there were four people: man, the wife, the son, and the son's wife. You see, daughter-in-law. Four people in the house. So they had cooked just a very little, just to maintain themselves for till the end of the 12th year, and then the rain. They were expecting the rain would come, and they would be perhaps again able to get at least sufficient to get on with. So the wife of the head of the family told that it is her meal that will be served to the guest. Then the eldest man, means the father of the family, said that no, he is the head, and therefore it is his food that will be first served to the guest. Well, the son and the daughter-in-law came and said, no, you are all two old people. We are young, therefore our meal will be first served to him. And so there was a discussion. And at the end of the discussion, they said, all right, let us begin and feed him. But the man who came, the guest, was very hungry. So it was not one's portion was not enough. In fact, he ate the whole thing that was cooked. The whole cooking of the family was given to the guest. And this family died of starvation, he says. I went to that house when the dish was laid out, it was there. So I rolled my body in that, and it became golden, because it was really something great sacrifice was done, and my body became golden. When this king did this sacrifice for 12 years, I thought my other half also will get converted, but I find that it is not. You see, that is a sacrifice done in sincerity, for without any motive. Here the king has done it, of course, for great eclat, as they say in French. You see, great pomp and ceremony, and everything nicely done and well done, and then it is done for the sake of, at last, to say sake of name, as a religious man and something like that. Well, the mongoose found out that this sacrifice was not so great as the sacrifice of an unknown man who gave up his life in a most silent and most unknown manner. You see, now gives some idea of how to look at the work and its value. It is done for the sake of the divine alone, at the command of the divine. All work done in an egoistic spirit, however good for the people in the world of ignorance, is of no avail to the speaker of yoga, because it takes him away from the main purpose. The idea of bigness of work or smallness of work, for instance, there are people who say that if you want to do spiritual work, it must be big work. For that, I don't know, it was Ramakrishna or somebody said that when the banyan tree comes out, the shoot of the banyan tree, it does not sound like a gun or cannon. It's very silently it comes out. It comes out just like that without anybody noticing it. And it is a tremendous affair that has happened. You see, banyan tree is going to last thousands of years perhaps, without any sound. Well, big work or small work, it is large, bigness or smallness is quite foreign to the spiritual truth. Spiritually, there is nothing big or small. Such ideas are like those of literary people who think that writing a poem is a high work and making shoes or cooking the dinner is small and low one. There are people who think like that. So he says there is no such thing. But all is equal in the eyes of the spirit, and it is only the spirit within with which it is done that matters. Not what you do, how you do, from where you proceed. And in work, when you try to do the work with the spirit of yoga, means for the sake of practice of yoga, then one has to be conscious. That is the first necessity, that you do it without desire, without any motive, you do it without your egoism, or you do it as an offering, then you have to remember. All the time that you do any action, you have to remember that you have to offer it to the divine. This is for the sake of the divine and not for myself. That's what one mentally feels, perceives, or repeats. It depends on the nature of man. You see, there are people who feel it like that, or perceive it like that, or people have an idea of repeating the thing every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You will again remember that I must offer my work. And what work did I do without offering? Then you will remember. In retrospect, he will give you offering again. That is the practice. You see, it is like child learning to walk. It is not done in one day, but it is done and it is very effective afterwards. Because then one is not to sit down only for meditation. Whatever he is doing, he is meditating. Because what is meditation? Concentration of consciousness on a high motive or on truth, on the reality. Well, that is what you do when you work. If you work with the motive of karma yoga, with the desire to do the yoga through action, then you remember the divine in every action that you are doing. And there are many such stories in India about this thing. You see, there was an agriculturist who was doing this work, a farmer, you see, and he was digging. So every dig, every stroke, he used to remember the divine. You see, every stroke he used to remember the divine. He had not to bother about sitting and doing mala or meditation. And the beauty is that whatever he had to do in his farming, well, his correct guidance was given to him throughout. He got the correct guidance in his work because he was only remembering. He is no other more. You see, first of all, he was not trained, and therefore his mind had not become sophisticated like modern mind, so as to question every time. He has simple faith, so he, every stroke he would remember. Every stroke he would remember the divine. That's all, and that gave him the inner opening to some truth and light by which, well, not only his nature became purified, but his work gained in its efficiency. It is quite possible to make work a means for meditation. Well, that is the process which is suggesting here. It is easy for one comparatively to remember and be conscious. This is the most important part. Have the remembrance of the aim, and with that aim to take up the right attitude. When you take up the right attitude, you become conscious. And yoga means increase of consciousness. Yoga means increase of awareness. Yoga does not mean, the small narrow path by which you mount to something. No. Yoga, you become aware of things everywhere. And you become more and more conscious of what is happening within oneself, why one is doing, from where the thought has come, what is to be done with the thought, is it to be put in practice or not? Every time it becomes like that. And when the attitude is only to realize the truth, one gets the correct guidance of what is to be done. You see, the guidance comes from inside because the psychic, being the true soul, gets in contact with the truth. By the attitude which one has taken, by the decision that work or action is to be used for realizing the divine. All the energy that goes into action then takes an upward turn, you see. Now what happens is that action, when it is done for desire, takes a downward turn like that. Or when it is egoistic, it takes a cord to bind oneself to his limitation of, little self. But when action is done and offered to the divine, well, it opens out a way so that the energies that go into action take an upward turn. You see, they move high. Normally, in a very intellectual or moral man, they are horizontal. In majority of person, they are downward turn, you see, and in very few it is upward turn. If one wants to turn the major flow of energy upward, the shortest way is to accept work for spiritual life and turn work into karma yoga and to a means for realizing the divine. It is comparatively easy to remember and be conscious when one sits quiet in meditation. It is difficult when one has to be busy with work. This requires practice, you see. The remembrance and consciousness in work have to come by degrees, and you must not expect to have it all at once. Nobody can get it all at once. It comes in two ways. First, if one practices remembering the mother and offering his work to her each time one does something, then that slowly becomes easy and habitual to the nature. The beginning of action, end of action. You remember and offer. Well, then afterwards you get into a habit. And then even when you are not, wanting to, it will be there all the time present in your mind. That's one way of doing it. Second method is by meditation an inner consciousness begins to develop, which after a time, not at once or suddenly, becomes more and more automatically permanent. What consciousness you reach in meditation, you maintain. And you try to keep that intact and keep contact with it in whatever you are doing. So one is to remember at the beginning and end of action and offer it. Another is to carry the consciousness of meditation inward, to maintain the contact with the consciousness attained in meditation throughout action. Whatever work you are doing, you remember the contact with the consciousness which you had. Supposing you had peace in meditation, then you maintain peace. And whatever you are doing, you try to do it in the medium or in the enclosure of peace. So the peace surrounds you like a, it is like something that goes around yourself. It is called envelope. You see, envelope of peace. And you are all the time in peace. Whatever disturbance is outside, you remain, isolated from everything else, and you maintain that contact of the consciousness which you had in meditation. Well, that way, if a higher contact is attained in meditation, psychic contact with the universal power or with the divine consciousness, then you can maintain that in action. There are two ways of doing it. Universal power or with the divine consciousness, then you can maintain that in action. There are two ways of doing it. All should be done quietly and from within. I mean, not from outside only, like that. Generally, people act and work, but it is, action reaction, like that. There is not, they don't allow the thing to get in, and then, well, what shall be the response? There's no time. If a knock comes, a counter knock immediately follows. Now, when the knock comes, you take the knock inside. And when you have taken it inside, you decide, well, what should I do? How am I to react? And when you react, you find out from where you are reacting. You see from where? You see, a man comes and does something which you don't like. Well, that's the first knock. The normal reaction is that you either go for him or you do something which is immediately throw out. But when you do like go inside like that, and then you say, yes. So from the point of view of my doing the yoga, what action should I do which I can offer to the divine? Then in that case, probably you take up an inner attitude and act from the inner attitude with a peace or with a detachment, which becomes perhaps more effective in setting right the situation than your immediate, like that reaction to reaction, action to reaction. And this you have to only test to find that it's very true, absolutely true. That when you act from inside and not immediately in a reaction to an outer shock or outer knock, well, in that case, the result that comes out of your action is not the same as when you immediately react to the outer contact. Absolutely different reaction. And that is the discovery to be made that this is very effective in dealing with situations, circumstances, and persons. We have seen that it is very effective in, dealing with circumstances. Some very bad circumstances are there. You take in and you don't be depressed and say, oh, nothing, hopelessness. Not that. You don't, if something good happens, you don't jump and say it is marvelous. But you take up the right attitude, offer it to the divine and say what is to be done. And quietly retire inside and come out with the guidance and again offer whatever is guided to you, to the divine. And this you offer it to the divine so that if anything is incomplete, the divine will complete and give a more perfect guidance. You see, at first step, the highest truth does not come because highest truth cannot be given to the individual at once. So what is given generally is the next step. next step to his condition, his situation. You see, it is what is given to him is that which will help him to grow. Therefore, he has to keep a margin for a correction of what guidance is given to him. He shouldn't say that the divine guidance is only limited to what guidance is given to him today. Divine might have given him one guidance today in one situation. But if he keeps his consciousness open and says, well, if there is a greater truth than this, if there is a higher truth than this, I will carry it out. Then, if there is one, he will be given that next time. See, in a situation where one is to remove some difficulty, one way may be suggested. But afterwards, quite a different way might be possible for him to act, and the guidance might be quite different. So one has to keep his consciousness open for a further guidance from this source, so as not to tie down the guidance to either a set reply or a formula or a set method. It must remain plastic all the time, so that whatever is necessary, he would be getting from the higher source. Otherwise, what would happen is that very often people, when they get some guidance, well, they tie themselves down and they say, this is the divine guidance. The divine guidance given at a certain time. Divine guidance is not once and for all. The divine guidance in a certain situation. Well, in another situation, or even in the very similar situation, quite another guidance might be given. So that because the truth is infinite and there is an infinite ascent to the truth. Therefore, when one is here, well, he has to keep margin for the possibility of ascending further up, further up, further up, till, well, the presence is there, and then the problem becomes comparatively simple because the responsibility of action is taken away from oneself in great degree, to a very great degree, and it is handed over to the divine power or the higher consciousness that is working in him. Well, in that case, the problem becomes comparatively simple. All should be done quietly from within, working, speaking, reading, writing, as part of your real consciousness, not with the dispersed and unquiet movement of ordinary consciousness. From quiet, the whole thing proceeds. From the true source, the whole action is done. Well, it takes another quality in that case. All the very same action partakes of a different quality. Obviously, that is one great utility of work. What is it? That it tests the nature and puts the aspirant, means the yogi, in front of the defects of his outer being which might otherwise escape him. He rather uses work as a test for yoga. Because in work all the nature comes out, has to come out. And if anything in nature has remained imperfect, well, it will be seen immediately. You can't hide. That is what mother told one day. Somebody was telling. He said, yes, somebody came and said he had met a great yogi in the Himalayas and so on. So he was describing. Then he said, he was in meditation for 8 hours and so on, so on. Then casually by talking, he said that, but something happened and somebody had done something, and when he came out of meditation, he was very angry with him and so on. So mother said, oh, that was the result of meditation or what? You see, work is not that it will test. You can't escape. Obviously, one great utility of work as a means for spiritual life is that it tests the nature and puts the aspirant in front of defects of his outer being, which might have otherwise remained, escaped him. So it is good, because in work the defects come out. It is better to do work as a sadhana for getting rid of your defects than to accept the defects as a reason for not doing any work. Sadhak wrote to He was a clever sadhak. He thought that he will be able to convince Sri Aurobindo. So he wrote that I am very full of defects and therefore I don't want to do work. He was quite frank and said, I have got many, angularities and I will quarrel with everyone if I take up work. So it is better that I don't do any work. So to him he is giving guidance. He said it is better to do work as a sadhana for getting rid of your defects rather than accept the defect as a reason for not doing work. If you want the consciousness for true action very much and aspire for it, it may come. It may come in one of several ways. True action, and you want the consciousness to rise to a point from where you can do true action. If you aspire for it, you will get it in one of the two ways. One way is that you may get the habit or you may get the faculty of watching your movements in such a way that you see the impulse of action coming and can see to its nature. Before it comes into you, you can see something is coming and it wants to get done. And when it is approaching, you can see also its nature. Oh, it is a habit that is coming. Supposing you are sitting quiet and say, I want to smoke. Now, before smoke, you see, before it is coming here, you can notice it. Now, I am going to get this idea or impulse for smoke. And if you are in that situation, you can decide whether to accept it or not. Its nature is known to you, oh, this is only personal habit. Oh, this is only my irregularity. This is only my egoism. This is only my desire. You can quietly pass judgment on oneself. And that is very good because that gives you self knowledge. This is called self knowledge. When you begin self knowledge, you begin by knowing that there is a lot of ignorance. That is knowledge. The first result of Socrates. You see, the first result of self knowledge is discovery that one is ignorant. And then the knowledge increases by self awareness that whatever is wrong is eliminated gradually, and then what is right only remains. The tendency is to retain what is correct. You see, the true being and the imposition of desire and ego and selfishness and greed and impulse and passion and all that is known for what it is. And after it is known, it becomes comparatively easy to deal with it. He says you can get it. Get the habit or faculty of watching your movements in such a way that you see the impulse to action coming and can see also its nature. That is one way. Second method is a consciousness may come which feels uneasy whenever a wrong thought, a wrong impulse to action or feeling is there in you. This happens in a people in whose case the emotional being is in contact with the psychic being. When the emotional being is in contact with the psychic being, if anything wrong is done, there is immediate reaction and the sorrow. Whenever something wrong is done, one feels depressed, one feels sorrow. And that sorrow is not of depression or failure, but of something that should not have been and has been. That's all. That takes place. Uneasy whenever you feel uneasy. It is called malaise in French, you see. Malaise. You see, something that you feel not right. That's all. Uneasiness. Whenever a wrong thought, wrong impulse to action or feeling is there. Third way is that something within you may warn or stop you when you are going to do something wrong. You see, whenever you are going to do something comes in and gives you a warning. Generally, it's a psychic being working through mind or emotion or vital being. It is necessary to adopt a method which would generalize the whole attitude of consciousness so as to embrace all the movements at a time. Don't adopt a narrow method in sadhana. He is telling the disciple that that is what I was telling yesterday. That instead of adopting a narrow method and saying, oh, this narrow method is very effective, but it's only effective for a small purpose and for a limited result. What is required is a generalization of the method of doing the yoga so that it may be first tried by all and the result may be on the whole of human nature. All the parts of human nature must attain their fulfillment by their practice. Some people always tell you that my guru has given me a mantra by which I do this thing. Well, because it takes one point of consciousness, contacts and awakens the being, and the being awakens and he gets some development. Now, how is the modern man to fulfill himself fully by this process? A psychological method in which anybody interested or anybody with an aspiration should be able to follow. Then that method would be capable of being tried by all people. After all, this has to be done by anybody who wants to do it. You can't compel people to do it. You can say all people will not do it at a time. But anybody who wants to do it, one should have a general method and not a particular limited small method which is effective in giving him a partial, release or a partial fulfillment. So he is saying that you must have a method, generalization, the whole attitude of consciousness so as to embrace all the movement at the time. For example, this practice is suggesting the practice of separating nature's force in you, Prakriti, nature's force in you, and Purusha, the conscious being in you, standing back detached from all the movements of your nature and observing them as a witness and knower, and finally as a giver of or refuser of sanction, and at the highest stage of development, the Ishvara, the pure will and master of your whole nature. Now, this is a practice which anybody can try. Separation of nature, he says, this practice of separating nature's force working in you, mental nature, vital nature, emotional nature, physical nature, you sit down and watch your nature as a flow of nature. Then when you see the seer that looks is not the nature. You sit down and try to look at your mind. Then you say, oh, the thoughts are running in my mind. So it is like you yourself watching the people passing on the road. They are not your thoughts first because you are watching them and you say, oh, I am watching my thoughts. So you say, yes. The one by one they are passing and you say, yes, 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 I know them all. They were coming and so on. Now, yes, let them go away, let them go away, let them go away and they will go. You stand quite detached. The flow of nature goes on, but one who is watching the flow is not in the flow. That is the witness self, detached from the flow of nature. You watch your desires, then you are on the vital plane. You see, it is like that. One is on one top floor, then you are on the mind. You are on the middle floor, you are on the emotional level. You are on the lower level, you are on the vital being. Then you watch the flow of your impulses, desires, ambitions, ego, all kinds of, things coming and you say, yes, this is, yes, he's wanting that, yes, 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 it's all right, it's all right, it's all right, I don't, you are not in it, you are outside. And when you see, like this flow of the river or the stream that is there, if you are in the stream, then you will feel the flow and you will be running in the stream. Thoughts, ideas, impulses, attachments, desires, everything. But you come out and stand and then you watch, then you say, oh yes, the stream is going. You have nothing to do with the stream. Unless you put your foot into it and get carried, well, nothing, it's not going to carry you. Surely one who is standing on the ground is not to be carried by the stream. Then there is a part in man that can stand detached like that. That is the beginning of the divine consciousness in man. Because it is free. The first act of freedom of the self is felt when you stand separate from nature and watch it as if it was a force that did not belong to you or at least had no binding, force on you, no capacity to pull you. You simply stand and say it can flow as much as it like. I'm not going to participate. Well, then you watch on. It gets tired afterwards because its interest is that you must flow. If you don't flow, it's not interested in flowing. And it is flowing because you have allowed it to flow. You have given consent to it in the past. You liked it in the past. You have said, yes, I like those thoughts. That's why they come. You see, the more pertinent example is like that of a farmer who lets his land open. Now, if you leave your farm without any fence, then people carry their car or anything and their cattle or anything pass by. Is it not this? Then there's no fence, so you allow. If 10 years they go on doing like that or 12 years, well, after one day you suddenly put a fence, Naturally, you are out for trouble, is it not? They all gather and say, but gentlemen, we are here all the time, we are coming, we are going, we are using for 12 years, what is it? Now you say, but you say, it's my farm. You say, no, 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 but it's our way. Farm may be yours, but the way is mine. So that is what the thoughts and impulses do to the man. The thoughts have been allowed to come, so they come. Now you detach, still they come because they have a habit. And they know that this is the place for us to go. This is our house. So when they find that this is not a house, they might shout for some time, make it more strong, resistance to you, offer a resistance and try to be persuasive and then persistent and then fighting. Ultimately, they will retire because your sanction is withdrawn. All impulses that come to man have been sanctioned by man in the past. You see, they can't come without sanction and consent. So everything that comes, well, was given one say assent or a consent. Now the best thing is to withdraw consent. If you don't want to do, withdraw. It will drop down. 6 months, 1 month, 2 months, 1 day. It depends on the will and separation. The more separation, the more effective the separation, immediately the flow will change. Flow will not continue as before. It can't continue because it is a sanction of this that is responsible for the flow. So if the witness first detaches and doesn't want to do anything, well, the flow will automatically come to slow speed and ultimately to slow down and say now there is no more. Well, then you are in a condition to change the nature and say no, now no more flow of this kind, but there will be flow of another kind. And you can dictate to the nature. Now this separation of nature flow or nature movement and a witness self is a universal application. And that is the first ground of individual's freedom. Aspire to feel the presence of the divine Shakti, means divine power, behind the world and its forces. Distinguish between lower nature of ignorance and the higher divine nature whose character is absolute calm, peace, power, light and bliss, and aspire to be raised and led gradually from the lower nature to the higher nature. Now that is what we were talking yesterday or this morning, was it? I don't remember now. But I gave this instance that the foundation of human nature is to be changed. The present foundation is desire, ego, ambition, selfishness, and subjection to ideas of the mind. That is the basis. Well, instead, there must be calm, peace, power, light, and bliss. Quite different set of psychological conditions in order to allow the higher consciousness to be established in man. Now, therefore, the foundation is to be changed and a new foundation is to be laid down. And in that, the lower nature has to be, well, changed by aspiration. Aspire. Aspire is to open yourself to the working of the higher power and presence of the divine power. And ask her, request her, or pray to her to raise you and gradually lead you from the lower nature to the higher nature. So as to keep under control egoism and desire and selfishness and greed and establish in its place calm and peace and power and detachment and equality and the reign of light and true consciousness in you. Until then we stop. Time being.
Method of watching where the thoughts are coming from, of standing apart from them.
Yes.
It's an extremely difficult thing to do because providing one can stand apart from it, which most of the time is pretty hard to do. When you begin to trace it down, it's extremely difficult to know where these thoughts are coming from or why they're coming. So it serves little purpose, to stand and say, well, I've got this thought, but, what am I doing with it?
No, you are not tracing the origin of thought. First idea that you have to remember is that thought comes because you have consented to it. You have given an assent in the past, that's why it is coming. Thought is coming from the universal mind. You see, if you want to get into the truth of it, you will get also by practice. Now, it is no use trying to get origin of thought because there is no origin of thought within anybody. It is universal thought. It is nobody's thought. It comes because, well, this center has given an opening and invited it, so it comes. You see how the wind blows? Well, if my window is open, the wind will blow. I have been keeping it open for so many years that now it is blowing. Now I decide, no, I think I had better close my window. That's all. That's what you are trying to do. Universal mind has got the whole world of thought, and there is no end to thought. And that is not one world, there is another world. World of vital being and vital forces, world of impulses, ambitions, all kinds of passions, and it is tremendous world. It is a universe, each one, and whatever one is open to comes into oneself. We are not to be carried away by that because we have allowed some forces to enter into our house. The whole question is how to protect our house. And human being is the most protected being if he is conscious. These forces cannot take possession of us. You understand? There is a difference in ignorant play of forces and possession of play of forces. When you become an agent in their hand, then they possess you and use you. But generally, what the forces do is that come into you by your own consent, by persuading you that it is good to have that. When a man smokes, well, he likes to smoke. He wants to smoke. That's why he gets the impulse of smoking. Now, the force of smoking comes through the atmosphere. It is in the universe. It is in the whole, conditions surrounding. He may have a friend. He may have a club. He may have a house. He may have relations who are smoking. Well, it is easy for the force of smoking, which is conscious, just to approach him and say, can I catch? Can I catch? Then if the man lets open his window, then he says, yes, well, it's very bad smell. But when so many people are doing it, no, it must not be not so bad. And when such a nice man is smoking, it should certainly be some good about it. And then I read in the paper that smoking accelerates the nervous system, and when you are tired, it bucks you up, and you get again into a good condition. And then you say that you see it is quite a fine flavor. Also, sometimes the cigarettes are very finely flavored, and cigars, and it is nice. And suddenly, then you see. You meet a friend and the friend says, say, why don't you take a smoke? Then say, oh, I don't like smoking. What is it? You be in a company and not smoke is not good. You just must keep company. Well, the force has sufficiently persuaded him to accept. Well, it begins. So the force did not possess him. It allowed him to make an opening and open his window for him to enter. Well, when it has entered for 10 years, it says, now I won't go very quickly. I won't go very fast. I will take some time. Unless you have forced to simply eject him and throw him out and close your door and say, get out. Well, that only very few people can do. Some people I know who can do it, but it's not everybody who can do that. Well, the same with every impulse. Same with every impulse. They are conscious beings. It is wrong on the part of men to think they are creating. There's nothing. Those forces have full understanding of human nature and themselves. They are not unconscious movements of nature, inconscient things coming like that. They are very conscious and they play with men consciously. So it is better to become aware and deal with them to protect one's own house, you see.
Meditation.
Mhm.
You gave a definition of meditation.
Meditation is really concentrating the whole consciousness on a high purpose. There is one, it is called contemplation, and another is called concentration. If you want to be in detail, you see. Now, contemplation is a meditation in which you maintain a mood but directed towards knowledge of one subject only. And you do not try to bind your consciousness down to any aspect of the subject. You keep your mind open only to that subject. For instance, you sit down and say, I want to know something about divine love, let us say. Then you say, you put your mind and not allowed to think on any other subject except that. But on love, everything will be allowed. Well, because love is a world in itself, in one sense, you see. So all aspects of love can come, and all sides of love, so to say. Well, that would be more or less contemplation. But when you say concentration, then you pin it down to one point and you allow the whole force of consciousness to concentrate only on that and not anything else. Concentration is generally for utility, for a definite end, so to say. Generally not for it is more, or supposing you want to remove some defect of nature, or to get rid of something, or to get a knowledge of one particular aspect of something, then you put your concentration on it for change of nature, for throwing out a defect, or for knowledge of something in a concentrated way. Well, that would be pinning it down to a point and not keeping it open to a subject which can be wide, but one subject. You see, that becomes another type of contemplation. A contemplation in which you get a world of knowledge without putting it down to a point. You see, that opens out all sides of that question. You see, but only one question, and it goes on developing that subject, because if you get habit of meditating like that, then all the aspect of that will go on revealing themselves. The knowledge does not come by mind creating knowledge. You see, knowledge is there somewhere already existing, and when mind is in a state of that opening and aspiration, then that knowledge comes into it. No, knowledge is not created by mind at all. All these things, if you tell the man in the street, he won't understand, you see. But knowledge is not created by mind. Mind only gets, as he says in Life Divine, the image of pre-existent reality. That's all. What mind knows is there somewhere already. It was not known to mind. It was there. Mind didn't bring it out from nothing. New tendency, there are three psychological processes, you see, which work for good as well as bad tendencies in human nature. Persistence, resistance, and recurrence. These are the three laws of, you see, of change of nature. If you want to do, then you must count on these three: persistence, resistance, and recurrence. If a good tendency is established also, it will persist. If a bad tendency is established also, it will persist. If you throw it out, it will resist. And when it is thrown out, it will try to recur. This is always the process it will take place, you see. Good tendency also the same thing. Any tendency once established in nature, well, has the triple movement. One is of persistence, resistance, and recurrence. So if you establish a line of thought, a habit, or a line of thinking or acting, well, it will try to persist. If you throw it out, it will resist. And it will try to recur and come back again after 1 month, 2 months, 10 days, 6 months. Try to come back and see if it can again take hold. Good tendency also the same thing. If you put an honest man into a situation where he has to take bribe, he won't be able to take bribe. There is persistence of that, the stamp of aristocracy and nobility, so that he can't take bribe. Though he has a situation in which bribes are coming to him, but he can't take. Well, there is persistence of the good tendencies in him, you see. If he takes something in him, will become uneasy and it will resist. Even if he goes under, after 6 months, he will say, I must become what I was, and he has to go back. It is like that.
being the witness, in other words, detachment, is one of the most helpful things.
Yes, yes, that is one important part of yoga
Yeah.
and is generally applicable. Its greatest good point is that it is possible for anybody to practice if he is serious and sincere. Everything takes time.
I find it very hard to do these things, but
Yes.
I get what how I say to myself now. I mean, this thought comes out automatically to me.
Hmm.
It may sound silly, but it's helped me. Well, just don't take yourself so serious.
Hmm? Hmm.
Don't take yourself so serious.
Yes. Yes. That is to say, it comes to this that don't be weighed down by the weight of what you want to do. It only means this much. It should mean this only. Don't be weighed down by the task that you want to undertake. Yeah, that's all. Don't be weighed down. That's all. Take it lightly and take it up and seriously and sincerely and depend upon your own earnestness and sincerity and divine help. After all, it's not you who are going to do the whole thing. God is also going to do something.
Don't be weighed down by the past and the other things.
Hmm?
Maria's asking you to repeat it. Don't be weighed down, isn't it? By the
Yes,
past and the
yes,
other
that's
things.
it. Don't be weighed. It means only this much. That don't be weighed down by the undertaking or the task which is before you of yoga and so on. Oh, what a wonderful. Oh, the whole world is not falling and you are not going to bear the weight of the world either on your head, on your shoulders. We are going to take up the burden of your own nature, which is not very heavy. After all, ignorance of oneself is light in one sense because it's only one's own. For oneself is enough, that I know. But still, it's enough for
Only
oneself.
oneself. Only one.
Quite enough. Yes.
Well, is the saying true that whatever we lay down, we have to go back and pick up?
Huh?
Is the saying then true? Whatever we lay down, we have to go back and pick up sooner or later.
I don't know what you mean by that.
The things that we reject,
Yes.
the things that we
No,
don't
not,
want to do or skip
No.
over. Yeah, skip over.
not necessarily. I don't understand it unless.
We are doing something and we want to get out of it. We just,
That should be there. Postponing the, let us take instance of a man who dislikes drinking or smoking. Only very rough idea. Then you can't say that because he has disliked drinking, he will have to drink. I don't think. Not necessarily. It depends on the way in which he is looking at it, you see. If you have turned away something because one part of you was attracted by it, then it may happen that in order to work away your subconscious attraction, well, it might pull you again. But that will depend upon what you are doing with yourself. If you are devoting yourself to a higher consciousness, then in that case, it has no power to come back. But if you are living ordinary life, it may come back with a vengeance and take hold of you. Quite right. It can happen. Because there was an attraction of one part, you see. If there is an attraction of one part of the being, the vital, but the mind is free and the emotions are free, so they have taken another direction. Because of them, the vital part is overcome. Well, in that case, well, the tendency may come back, waiting for its opportunity. But if one is devoted himself to higher consciousness, then the effect of the higher consciousness may bring such a light and power that the impulse will have no strength to come back. We also, when in yoga, one forgets that, you see, one's own nature is not doing the whole job, you see. One's own nature is only preparing for the higher action. And the most potent force in yogic life is the higher consciousness. So what that will do will depend upon sincerity. If one is sincerely detached from the impulse, there is no power in the impulse to come back because it is rejected. Certainly not. But if there is attraction and calling back, naturally, the individual is responsible. Otherwise, given to the higher power, it will throw away everything. Things have no force in themselves except the sanction that is given to them.